Last week in the Commission, when we were discussing the recommendations for the member states for the next budget in the European semester exercise, one table was circulated addressing how Europe's trade with other parts of the world has developed over the last decade. For some countries it's a nice table, for others it's not. For EU 27, it's not that bad. We had a trade deficit of 150 billion euros last year, not that bad. But it's interesting to go into some of the details, because what is it that really weighs down our relationship with the outside world? Well, the bill for our imported fossil fuels last year was 573 billion euros. The bill just for imported oil was 315 billion euros. And what is that except some very high figures? Was 350 billion euros, that's almost the size of the Greek debt, and then everybody knows at least it must be quite substantial. So I believe that it is very, very clear that to address downsizing that kind of bills, that is not just about energy or environment or energy independency or climate, it's also something we should do out of macroeconomic concerns. There are really many reasons why we should make this growth greener and cleaner. And one of the most obvious things we can do, the Minister already stressed upon it, that is energy efficiency. We sent out recently from the Commission an overview of when we calculated where are the growth potential job-wise in Europe this side of 2020. Basically, we could see 3 areas where we can increase jobs substantially up to 2020. ICT, health, and the whole green sector. Where the whole green sector in itself, renewables, energy efficiency, waste handling, things like that, there is a potential of creating 5 million new jobs this side of 2020 in Europe if we get it right and if we get started now. That is why I would sort of offer a bottle of champagne to the person that could come up with anything we could do in Europe right now to create growth that could create more jobs in the short term than if we actually embrace the agenda of energy efficiency. Energy efficiency in our buildings, retrofitting buildings, making our grids smarter, more efficient, stopping the leaks, all that kind of thing. The attractive thing about that is that kind of jobs cannot be outsourced. They stay locally and regional. And we have the products, we have the technologies, it's not rocket science. I believe that it's quite telling that in Europe we are on track to meet the binding CO2 target for 2020. We are on track actually to meet the renewables target for 2020. Unfortunately, we are not on track to meet the energy efficiency target, although that would be the most cost-efficient thing that we could think of doing. So, dear member states, let's not dilute something, and I'm referring to the Energy Efficiency Directive, that can prove not only to create jobs now and here, but which can also, in the longer term, bring down costs for citizens, for households, and for companies. I really believe that it's extremely important that we now decide that we want to do that and bring all the very good examples we have out there to scale. Last week, the Commission, in our communication, suggested that when it comes to the big summit on the 27th and the 28th of June, there is this discussion about the European Investment Bank and whether the framework should be increased by 10 billion euros so that they could lend out more money. We believe that might be a very good idea, but we just think that, as we write in that communication, it should be targeted to something that creates jobs very fast, for instance, to SMEs and energy efficiency. And there is a lot of interesting projects out there, but they need some technical assistance, and the EIB already has the experience and highly successful, but small dedicated energy efficiency programs to build on. The ELENA program, for example, has approved 30.5 million of grants, which led to 1.6 billion investments in energy efficiency. It's actually estimated that each invested billion through these kind of systems create around 25,000 jobs. That is sort of the factor. So let us not waste this opportunity to make a difference in the very short term to EU citizens, livelihoods, energy bills, and environment. I really think that it could be part of the growth agenda for the 27th and 28th of June, and I hope that that kind of decisions will be taken. It will not create a lot of, we will not need a lot of new ideas. The projects are out there, but they need some help in order to get them financed. That is actually the same kind of thinking that is behind the Commission's proposal for the next MFF. We believe that it is incredibly important, also via our citizens, to prove that €1 spent at the community level, that actually adds value to the European community. We believe that we should use the money more focused, more targeted than we maybe have done up till now. And I understand that to spend the money more in line with where our political priorities are, that is also very much in line with the Cohesion, Friends of Cohesion group that met recently. That was also a very clear message from that meeting. So what are we suggesting in the Commission in this view? We are very much suggesting that we are creating this Connecting Europe facility for ICT infrastructure, energy infrastructure, transport infrastructure. We really believe that we should continue to Europeanize our energy policies with more smart grids across boundaries, things like that. We also believe that, for instance, in the agriculture field, we should take care also to get added value out of all the money spent for the CAP, for instance, through greening portions of the money that we give to farmers. All in all, we suggest that 20% of the whole budget, the whole envelope, will be supporting our climate and energy policies. That, of course, does not mean that that will go to something that is just called climate, but that we take care to spend the money with multi-purposes so that in the end we can prove that at least 20% helped us to achieve the transition that we need into a more green economy. That also goes for the whole Horizon 2020, where we think that it's extremely important to keep a very, very strong focus on investing more in demonstration programs, new technologies, things that will make us competitive in the longer run. It has, what I've just been mentioning here, it has so far been more or less ignored in the current debate. I hope it's a sign of full consensus. When I mention it here, it's of course because I'm not 100% sure of that. So I would very much like to see this smart spending commitment being taken up by the Council in the relevant text. Let me very shortly say, we heard from Ditlev Engel the need for a clear regulatory framework when it comes to these long-term investments we have to do in Europe. That is also why now in the Commission, and it was reflected very much earlier this week when we presented the new communication on renewables, that we are starting not only to talk about what should happen in 2020, but also looking ahead to 2030. As you can imagine, it's not because we do not have enough to attend to for tomorrow and next week and next month, but we just know that for investors, 2020 is just around the corner. They are already planning what to do up in the 2020s, and that is why we are considering now in the Commission how to provide industry and investors with the predictability, both when it comes to CO2 and when it comes to renewables. There is one thing we have learned during the crisis in Europe. I would say that is, it helps to stay focused on something you want to do when you have targets and when you get the pricing right. That is a lesson learned that I think that we need to sort of continue. I would argue, who would have thought that we would have increased our renewables portfolio in Europe during these years of crisis had it not been for the binding targets. Targets actually work this is something we have experienced very clearly in Europe. But my very final point to you is about some broader issues on this. Because being responsible for foreign policy and for Europe as a whole, I think that many of these issues, it's not just about what we are doing in Europe. It's not just about the economics or the environment issues here. In the end, it's about Europe's political, strategic, and economic position in the world of the 21st century. I am in no doubt that to become more resource and energy efficient, that will become a competitive parameter of the future. And we are faced with still more competition in areas where we used to be second to none, where we are still very good, but we are not alone there anymore. So it's extremely important to get the incentives right. It's very, very important also to note that during the crisis, the green sector proved to be more resilient towards job losses than almost all other sectors you can think of. But as I said, it's also about what kind of profile do we in the European Union want in the world outside Europe. I had the pleasure to attend on behalf of the European Union and together with our 27 member states the climate conference in Durban last year. I will not at this late moment bore you with all the details of this very, very challenging process. But I think there is one interesting thing to note from that experience last December. And that was how much we in Europe can achieve, where we managed to speak with one voice. Not meaning that only one can do the talking, but that 27 member states, the European Parliament, the Commission, conveying the same kind of messages. And when we are doing the right alliances here with OSIS, LDCs, and a lot of progressive developing countries, so that around 100 developing countries, plus the European Union, help to pressure China, India, and the United States to accept things that normally they would not have accepted. I think it's very interesting to build on that alliance also for the future. Very shortly, Rio+20 is coming up, but also as a more long-term strategic vision for the European Union. I will end with that because I think that that makes the connection to the domestic policies, showing how important it is that we deliver domestically what we are also arguing internationally, and so that we, through our policies, actually get some friends strategically, geostrategically, on the world stage. That's also, by the way, why it's important that we now deliver on the midterm financing in the climate field. And I will just mention one very final thing to you that I think you should be aware of. At the 15th of May, the finance ministers accepted that the revenues from the inclusion of aviation in our emissions trading scheme, that revenues can, through member states, go into the Green Climate Fund. This might sound like a boring thing, but you have, of course, noticed how challenged our scheme for aviation in ETS, how much it has been challenged internationally. I believe that when the Americans can no longer claim that this is just a tax going into sort of the European pockets, but it's something that finances international climate activities. And if the Chinese and the Indians who are fighting this scheme because they want to stick with the common but differentiated responsibility, and they have this very special way of interpreting it as if it was that the Chinese business person or the Indian banker traveling to Europe should not pay for their pollution. If we can prove that the €2 or whatever they have to pay for their emissions, that would be channeled back through member states to the international climate funding, I hope you can see that strategically this would be quite important, because a lot of developing countries can see that it makes sense what Europe is actually trying to do. So I just wanted to end with this appeal And then I really do hope that now in the next few decisive weeks, and also during the Danish presidency with the Energy Efficiency Directive, and the next half year around the MFF, that a guiding principle will be that it's not enough that we in Europe are good at setting targets. It's not enough that we are talking about them. Europe's big challenge is, despite the crisis, to do, to act, to deliver. And the decisions over the next few weeks and the MFF are excellent opportunities. I strongly believe that it's some opportunities that Europe cannot afford to waste. Thank you very much for your attention.